Hey everyone, I'm here with Gerard Batten, the current leader of UKIP and MEP. How are you doing, Gerard?
Hello, Carl. Nice to see you.
Yeah, how do you feel about how things are going with Article 13?
Well, we had a success yesterday in the European Parliament. What we did is to engineer a vote. First of all, we got the vote put on the agenda, and that vote was very important because what it did was to stop the directive, the copyright directive, going forward to what's called the trialogue, which is an EU-invented word, which means it goes into talks between a representative of the Parliament, the Commission and the Council, and it would basically have been secret negotiations. What then would have come out of that would have been a finished article where we would have had a choice of voting yes or no on that finished article. The vote that we got yesterday, what we did, the way that we engineered that, was process in the Parliament where my group, UKIP and the EFDD group, and the Greens did this as well, and some other people and individual MEPs tabled a vote. We got enough support to actually get that vote on the agenda, and then using the offices of people such as yourself and Paul Joseph Watson, we got that message out to literally, I think, millions of people. Every MEP got thousands upon thousands of emails saying support this vote, and so that's what they did. We voted yesterday, and we got it was a no vote. No vote meant a yes. It sometimes does in the Parliament. It meant no, we don't want this to go to trialogue. So we won that vote, but it was only by a fairly small majority of 40 votes in the Parliament. And the people who voted against, people who wanted it to go forward to these secret negotiations, you'll be able to read their names because it was a roll call vote and that will all be published.
Right, okay.
But what that did, all that does is given us a stay of execution.
Yes.
Because what happens now is that the directive will come back to the Parliament in September. The rules say it must come back in the next plenary session. There will then be a vote, there will then be a debate on the whole thing, and MEPs will have the opportunity to put amendments in. So then what then is voted on in the final analysis will be something that MEPs have contributed to and had a say in, because a lot of people from completely different walks of completely different parts of the political spectrum were opposed to this, like UKIP and the Greens, for example. I mean, the Green lady wouldn't even come to my office to talk to me about it.
See, it's interesting how this is a cross-party question. The fact that this is more, it's not really about any one political leaning. It's more about whether you think the EU should have increased amount of powers over the citizenry that they're not accountable to.
Well, this was about, I mean, I think there is actually probably a case that you need an international agreement to protect the rights of genuine authors and composers and people like that, who, because the whole digital and internet media thing is moving at such a pace, the law can't keep up with it.
Yes.
So it needs to be looked at, okay, so how do we protect people's rights who genuinely have produced something that other people are misusing, if you like, and not paying for? Okay, it's fair enough. But the whole danger of this thing is it looked like it was being engineered to close down alternative social media. People such as yourself, Paul Joseph Watson, Count Dankula, Milo, they would not have been able to reuse things on the internet without express permission or paying a fee. And that, of course, would completely shut down the kind of thing that everybody does on a daily basis on Twitter, for example.
Yeah, that shuts down any kind of concept of fair use, doesn't it? Because the whole point of fair use is that you can remix without permission. As long as it's not just a direct reproduction of the original work. Yeah,
it's a bit like when you write a book and you make a quotation from somebody else's work and you put a reference in. Well, when you're retweeting something which is part of a television program or whatever that's been broadcast, everybody knows what it is. You know, oh, there's a clip from the Daily Politics and that's our comment. Well, it's an advert for the Daily Politics, isn't it? You're not actually robbing them of any revenue.
No.
So I think there is a case for some kind of legislation. But I think this should be an international agreement. It shouldn't be something cobbled together by the European Union. Because I can tell you from long experience, what happens in the European Union is you get big business lobbying for the kind of legislation they like, because it puts their competitors out of business. We've only ever actually seen off a couple of these things in the 14 years I've been there. If I can give you two quick examples.
Sure.
There was something called the Ports Directive, which was about privatisation of ports. Seaports. There was massive opposition to that across Europe from mainly people who work in ports. So we had dockers turning up trying to burn down the building in Strasbourg. That was quite good fun. French ones as usual.
They are, yeah, but you've got to hand it to them. When they need to get out, they do it. You know?
And anyway, what happened on that was there was so much opposition to that, we voted it down. The Commissioner came before the Parliament and said, I'm very disappointed you voted against this. We'll just have to bring it back in a different form later. I mean, he was quite blatant about it. It took some time because it was only, I think, at the beginning of this term, if I remember correctly, it did come down. So 10 years later or whatever, it came back and it got voted through in a different form. Yeah. The other big one which we succeeded on was an intellectual property right directive. And what they wanted to do was to protect ideas. Yeah. So if there'd never been a spreadsheet invented, and you thought, I know a good idea, there's something called a spreadsheet. Yeah. Nobody else would have been able to develop a spreadsheet. So you couldn't have different types of spreadsheet working on different software. Yeah. So they would have actually closed down the ability to develop ideas. Right. There was a massive outcry against that across Europe from people. Again, MEPs got thousands of emails and we stopped it. We voted against it and it was stopped. And that hasn't yet come back.
So emailing your MEPs does actually make a difference?
If enough people are out there expressing their view, then the message gets through that this is a vote loser. Right. And of course, it doesn't matter for the UK because we're not going to be in the next European elections, but it does matter for all the other MEPs across Europe. Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting because I mean, I personally wouldn't trust the European Union with such wide-ranging decisions. I'm personally an advocate of decentralization. I would rather all of these things be done at a lower and lower local level, but that's because I suppose I'm an old-fashioned Englishman. Yeah. So let's not talk too much about the European Union itself because it's a very Byzantine and frankly boring topic. Yeah. Let's talk about your sort of political ideas. Because I've read that you're far right, very very far right. But then I've read that I'm far right, and honestly, I'm not really sure what far right even means anymore. It just seems to mean pro free speech, pro independence. I mean, what?
Well, it's very interesting. I think now anybody who isn't to the left of Jeremy Corbyn is far right. That's the accepted norm now. And I find this quite amusing in a way because I've spent 26 years of my life, the last 26 years in active politics. And what exactly have I been trying to do? I've been trying to play my part, as far as I can, in restoring democratic, independent sovereignty to this country. A democratic government elected by the people, answerable to the people, who make and unmake the laws, under our law, statute law and common law. So what I've been trying to do is restore the country that I thought I was growing up into. I'm not trying to, and that's about it. So I don't see how that qualifies me as far right or anybody that supports those ideas.
Well, again, I mean, what even is far right? Because I mean, I don't think they mean it to mean Nazi.
I do. I think they do mean.
You think so?
Because when they say far right, what you want to, it's meant to conjure. I mean, don't forget now, kids at school had the Nazis shoved down their throat. My sons went to school, and when obviously they went to school, when it came to doing their A-levels, got the history perspectives. And it's all about the Nazis. And I rang up the school and I said, I would like them to do history because I think it's quite a good subject for kids to do at A-level. Why is it all about the Nazis? Oh, that's the national curriculum. I said, well, okay, if you're going to teach them about totalitarianism, where's the stuff about Russia and the Soviet Union? Where's the stuff about China and Mao Zedong? Oh, no, it's the national curriculum. So they're only teaching one form of totalitarianism, and Hitler was right-wing. Therefore, anybody who's identified as right-wing is therefore a Nazi. I mean, this is a kind of brainwashing that kids have gone through.
It's certainly a kind of subtle linguistic manipulation, isn't it? And honestly, given the political affiliation of most teachers, I think there's a reason that the Soviet Union is kind of being subtly left off when teaching about totalitarianism.
Yeah, and we've had UKIP members, I won't say who they are, but we've had UKIP members. I've got fellow MEPs whose kids at school, the teachers have told them that their father is a Nazi. I'm not exaggerating. Yeah. We had another UKIP member, I won't say who it is. His child at school it's in a part of London where he was one of the only white child in the class. The teacher said, this boy's father is in a party that wants to send the rest of you back where you come from. I said, that's incredible. Well, did you complain? He said, well, yeah, but he doesn't want to take it too far because he's frightened of the consequences for his child.
It seems that the teacher's directly inciting people against that.
It reminded me of what actually used to go on in Nazi Germany against Jewish kids in a class.
Yeah, absolutely.
Singled out.
Absolutely. These people are not Germans.
But this is where we are now in this country with the kind of political climate that's prevailing, where only certain points of view are permissible. Yeah. And what I would think my points of view are perfectly reasonable, and I think you probably agree with me after having various conversations with me. But that's not allowable because it's not extreme left. So therefore you must be extreme right.
Yeah, I've noticed the political domination of the extreme left, not over necessarily policy, but more morality.
Yeah.
The public morality is very far left at this point. I mean, for example, there was an outrage because parents in a London school were objecting to the school promoting a pride parade in the school itself. And I mean, I would object if they were promoting some kind of heterosexual pride as well. I don't see that children, and we're talking 5-year-old children, need to be exposed to, frankly, the sexualization.
No, it's the curriculum. Everybody discovers this in their own time, in their own way. And I, you know, my kids are grown up now; they're adults. But I wouldn't want that at school. No. I wouldn't want them to talk about any form of. I mean, okay, you start to tell them the biological details because they where the babies come from most days. So you try to explain it in simple terms.
So when they're about to hit puberty.
Yeah, well, you know, kids have different. Kids ask different questions depending, you know, their own stage of development.
If they have to host a sex ed class, then you know, when they're about 10 years old or something, rather than 5, it's ridiculous.
But the point is, you should not be telling small toddlers about things like this. They'll have their own ideas, their own stage of development, and you should not be telling them about things like that.
The onus should really be on the parents.
Exactly. But now, of course, increasingly we're moving to a stage where the children don't belong to the parents, they belong to the state, and if the parents don't do what the state thinks is right, they threaten to take your children away.
That's what we're seeing in Canada, isn't it?
Well, and you had this famous case of the UKIP foster parents who had the foster children taken away when the council found out they were UKIP.
Yes,
that was a few years ago.
Yeah.
That was, I don't know, about 5, 6, 7 years ago.
Yeah, it's the increasing politicisation of social services, which is disturbing.
Very politicised, but not very good at protecting all the young girls under their care that have been sexually, sold into industrial sexual slavery.
Well, now I know you're a racist. Joking, obviously. Right. Okay. So that's interesting because, I mean, what you're saying isn't a million miles away from necessarily what Jeremy Corbyn would say. Apart from Jeremy Corbyn is kind of whipped by his own base at this point. Because I mean, I went to the pro-Remain march that was in London a few weeks ago. I still have to put the video up on that actually. But there was a huge march with chanting, "Where's Jeremy Corbyn?" Jeremy Corbyn just happened to be in Syria or something that day. You know, as far away from the actual protest as he could be. Because I think everyone knows that Jeremy Corbyn's a Brexiteer.
Well, the only thing that me and Jeremy Corbyn have had in common for the last 40 years is opposition to the European Union. And if you go remember back to the original, when we joined the European Union and the original referendum in 1975, interestingly, you had Enoch Powell opposed to the EU, and you had Tony Benn opposed to the EU. And although they were from different ends of the political spectrum, for the same reason, because they said basically it's the thin end of a very big wedge that's going to destroy independent democratic self-government, and that was their argument. They couldn't put their ideas into place, whichever part where they were on that political spectrum, because the EU was going to be doing it for them, and they would lose power.
And that's self-evidently true, and there's simply no denying that at this point. I mean, how much further can the EU get, having a single currency, a single market, a flag, an anthem, a shared border area? I mean, they're forming an army. What other form of trapping of statehood even is there? They've got their own parliament, they've got a sovereign entity.
They've got the trappings. What they really need now is the actual governance. Yeah. So what they're talking about, you know, they've got all the attributes that you just described. They want to be, eventually they'll have to do this, to be able to tax and spend so that they control the financial governance of the EU. And they'll need, they're pulling together their army, their police force, they want an intelligence service. They'll have all the attributes plus the power. And of course, they then won't be able to tolerate dissent.
Of course.
That's the problem, because no empire of that size in history has ever lasted, because people want their independence and their freedom. And then you have to start cracking down on them.
Yes, and like you say, the ability to tax a demos is really the only thing the EU is missing. I mean, I read Moderica Frederides, however her name's pronounced.
Federica Mogherini.
Sorry, I'm terrible with foreign names. I read a bunch of papers that she had written the foreword to, that were hosted on the European website, the European Parliament's website, about projecting power into Asia and Africa.
Yeah.
I mean, and with Guy Verhofstadt's talk of an empire of the good, it really does seem that they have, well, frankly, delusions of grandeur.
I don't think a lot of people don't know this, as they say. Yeah. But the European Union, the proper name for it now is the Union. If you read the Lisbon Treaty, the name was changed from the European Union to the Union. It's referred to as the Union.
Wow.
Because then it's not limited to Europe.
Absolutely.
And over the last 14 years, I've been to committee meetings where people are talking about bringing North Africa into the European Union. I mean, all of this is speculative at the moment.
Fantastic.
But they are laying all of the groundwork for this. They have partnership agreements, good neighbourhood agreements, all kinds of things. There's one coming up, actually, which I want to publicise in the coming months, which is the Marrakesh Declaration. Or this is going to be about cooperation with North African countries, but also very big on how you regularise and legalise immigration. Because what you'll hear over and over again in the Parliament is talk about regularising immigration, which means making illegal immigration legal. So it's not about controlling it, it's about saying, well, it shouldn't be illegal anyway, so let's have more and more people come in, but we'll do it properly because it has to be managed. They have to get off the boat and be given a ticket to go somewhere and looked after. That's what they actually want to do.
And that doesn't surprise me at all, given, I mean, the European Union is obviously an anti-national organisation. I mean, I'm sure even the most hardcore apologist for the European Union wouldn't contest that. And it doesn't surprise me at all, given what I've read from the European Union, that they want to continually expand the borders. I mean, that's what they've been doing in Eastern Europe, despite the fact that it's obviously been too soon. Don't they realise the kind of resistance they're getting within Europe itself? I mean, they must be aware.
You see, but that's because you and me are wrong.
Right.
Carl.
Okay.
I mean, this is what you've got to understand. When they're all sitting around in their little bubble in Brussels or in the Parliament in Brussels and Strasbourg, they know that they're right and we are wrong, and therefore we need to be re-educated. I mean, some of us are beyond re-education. They realise that,
Oh, yes.
But the great mass of people out there, they've just not understood the good things that they're trying to do for them. Right. So they must have more power to do this. They must talk to them in a much more friendly way so that they understand why. They must understand the things that are being done to them are for their own good, and then they'll all come round and they'll realise it's all wonderful.
I mean, you have to break a few eggs to make an omelette.
Exactly.
And that's very interesting, because the European project does seem to be highly ideologically driven around a kind of, I guess, almost an ideology that's created out of the European Union itself. This is when Guy Verhofstadt was like, we can create an empire of the good, I'm just sat there thinking, what kind of lunatic planet do you live on, where you think there can be a centralised European superstate that has nothing wrong, that has no objection from the people living within it, that is actually responsive to the needs of the people on the ground? And when it's built up of an ideology that is sort of transnationalist, and then you're bringing in Eastern European countries who have just got their sovereignty back, they've only had it within living memory. It's unbelievable to think that they're going to be able to bully Hungary, Poland, Austria, all these countries into doing their bidding. I mean, what's their plan to get past the national resistance? Is it just to coerce them into silence?
It's coming up to a problem now, a fault line, I think, in that what they did with all the Eastern European countries, and their MEPs told us this, frankly, when they turned up, we're in it for the money.
Yes.
They were getting enormous subsidies, especially on things like the Common Agricultural Policy, because Poland and these other countries are very much still agricultural economies. They'd all been held back by communism and the Soviet Union. They had two reasons why they joined: the money and the fact that their youngsters could actually move to Europe, Germany, UK, wherever, and get a better job and have a life, because they've just been suppressed for the last 40 years or more by communism. So who can blame them? Your life's been ruined by communism. You've got a 20-year-old, you go off and work in Germany
the
or the UK.
European Union portrays itself to be a Western liberal establishment. So it would appear on the surface to be safe.
Yeah, and I think where it's coming apart now is that, as I said in the speech I made in the Parliament Wednesday morning, if you sell your soul, sooner or later the devil sends someone to collect it. And now they've been told, okay, you've taken the money, you've got free open borders, you can move out of your country if you want to. Now we're going to move people into your country because we have plans for bringing in millions of people from Africa, the Middle East and wherever. Because they don't say that in such an overt way, but that's what the message. And you have to take them. And now they say, well, hang on a minute, we actually like having a homogeneous society and we don't want to change it. Well, you haven't got any choice, you've got to change it. And of course, when they try to do something about that, Poland now is being criticised, and Hungary, because they're actually saying that doing something illegal should be illegal. So they're trying to say that agencies who actually cooperate with illegal immigration, immigrants, are actually breaking the law and should be prosecuted. And you can't do that. And then you've got George Soros spending his billions actually trying to facilitate that in countries, as well as for paying for things like Antifa, who will go out and beat people up who actually oppose these kind of things.
And just to jump in there, I mean, normally when people mention George Soros, everyone thinks Jewish conspiracy theory, but people don't understand that George Soros does actually fund, I guess you would term them globalist and progressive institutions, like the Central European University in Hungary, which Orban is trying to get shut down because he feels that it's, I mean, you can look on the website, it's all social justice. It's just, and it's the farthest left sort of thing. I mean, I obviously know this sort of stuff very well, and I was looking at this thinking, wow, this is as radical as it gets, and I can completely understand why the Central Europeans are trying to get rid of his influence.
Yeah, I don't blame them. I think he's an evil old bastard.
I think he's an ideological old bastard. At the very least.
I think it amounts to the same thing, depending on your ideology.
I suppose,
but you see now, if I can just paint an alternative picture, what they should have done 40, 50 odd years ago is said, okay, what kind of Europe do we want? Yeah, we'd like to have free trade. We'd like to break down borders in terms of cooperation. Yeah, you could have had this is what EFTA was supposed to be about, and we betrayed EFTA and came out of it and reduced it to nothingness, really. But what you should have had is an association of countries where you've got a very small bureaucracy who says, okay, how can we facilitate the movement of cars? You know, we all want to produce cars, we want to buy each other's cars. What's the purely technical regulations, minimal technical regulations that we can produce for cars, fridges, beer glasses? So it's you only have to comply with that if you want to export your goods. So if you don't want to export your beer glasses, well, you make them any way you like. But if you do, you've got to comply with these minimum standards. And because it's nice to travel, isn't it? So where are the countries where we could have visa-free travel? Because we're not going to have vast movements of people because the economies are more or less the same. People are just going to come for a holiday or a visit or to take up a job offer. You could have had all that. Well, hang on a minute. Yeah, we'd like these things with Eastern European countries, but they're not quite ready for it yet because lots of people are going to migrate in vast numbers because they've been suppressed by the Soviet Union. So we'll have visa access travel. You've got to apply for a visa, but we can gradually approach this over a long period of time as your economies build up and become. You wouldn't need all your excess population.
I can already see the problem with this because that's not going to happen within their own lifetimes.
No,
they're never going to live to see that happen. And they aren't the sort of men who plant trees knowing that they're never going to sit in their shade.
But if your intent was good, that's what you'd do.
Of course.
You wouldn't do something where any idiot could sit down and say, well, if we do these things, I can see some unintended consequences along the road, which are not actually. If you allow them to make regulations that control everything, and don't forget all this talk about trade. Only about 10 to 14% of our economy is concerned with exporting to the EU.
Right, okay.
So
when they say that 45% of our trade goes to the EU, what do they mean by that?
You're talking about international trade. International trade is roughly about 20% of the economy, and that includes not just to the EU, but to the USA and whatever. 80+% of our economy is purely domestic. It's your plumber, your electrician, your plasterer, all the people that do things within the UK. So a proportion of it is international trade, and of that proportion, about half is with the European Union, half is the rest of the world. Our profitable trade is actually with countries like the USA. The EU sells us far more than we sell them, so although we trade with them, we don't make a profit out of it, as it were, whereas we do with the USA and the rest of the world. So it isn't 45% of our economy. 45%-ish of our international trade is with the EU, and even that's an exaggerated figure because everything that moves through the port of Antwerp is classed as European trade. So if you're sending containers worth of stuff to China and they stop off at Antwerp, that's counted as being European trade. So the figure is actually smaller than that.
So what do you think of Theresa May saying that she's not going to have a free trade deal with the United States then?
Well, you see, the other thing is that don't run away with this idea you have to have free trade deals.
No.
Now, the World Trade Organization has been negotiating down tariffs, financial tariffs, on trade for the last 40 odd years. And now they're generally quite low. I think on a large number of things they're actually zero.
Isn't the WTC tariff something like 2.5%?
Last figure I saw was about, let's say, 3.5 or something, just for the sake of argument. It's quite small. I mean, it's zero on a lot of things. It's high on some other things, like food, for example, or cars, I think is 9.9% or something. So that pushes the average up to 3.5. So You don't need trade deals to trade, because if you, the biggest trading partners of the European Union are countries like Russia, China, Singapore, Japan, who don't have trade deals. And likewise for us with the rest of the world, we trade on World Trade Organization terms. Where you've got to be careful of this trade deal idea. Everyone's running around like headless chickens. We must have trade deals with America and Australia. Not necessarily, because it's the non-tariff barriers to trade you have to worry about now. Is that people produce things to a certain standard, like the Americans. There's a lot of controversy about the chemicals that America puts in meat. So you can say, okay, we don't want to import your meat. If you had a trade deal with the Americans, it might say, well, you don't have any choice. Under WTO terms, you've got to import our meat. It's up to the standard that the WTO agrees. You might want to do that. But if you have a trade deal with them, you might have to. So I don't think we should rush into this thing that you need trade deals. My view, what I said when I wrote all this up, how we would get out of the European Union, which I did 4 years ago, and then developed it into a bit more of a detailed plan. If we'd have had a government that really wanted to leave the European Union, you'd have gone to them the week after the referendum and said, we're leaving now, we're going to repeal the European Communities Act 1972, we've left under our law, not your law, but don't worry about it. All the laws are going to stay in place under the Withdrawal Act, and we're going to now start repealing them and amending them, and we're going to tell you what we're going to do, and we're going to work with you to do it. First thing we're going to do is offer you tariff-free trade. You can have the free movement of goods, services, capital. You can't have people. Don't worry about the customs stuff, because you've had an agreement, for example, with Switzerland, which they have since the 1970s, where all this customs stuff is sorted out. We've got stuff now off the shelf. I'm sure we can adapt it. Won't be a problem. We'll sort this out very quickly with you. If you don't want that, tell you what, we'll have trade on WTO terms, and we'll send our stuff across the borders on the same basis that China, Singapore, Russia, and Japan do. How about that? You've got a week to think about it. It's your choice, not ours. You're the ones that got to decide. You let us know what you want to do.
Now, I can't imagine the Europeans would turn around and say, I don't know, perhaps laugh as Merkel did at Theresa May, or just outright dismiss within the same day as they did recently with Theresa May's latest ungenerous proposals.
But it's because she's so useless.
Yes, she is.
It's not so much as useless. I'm sure she is, actually. She was pretty useless Home Secretary. But she doesn't want to do it. So how can you have a negotiation with somebody who doesn't want to negotiate? I mean, they're frustrated as well. If I was at a committee meeting on Monday night in Strasbourg, and I said, I actually feel some sympathy for the Commission, because you're trying to negotiate with somebody who doesn't want to negotiate, who doesn't want to leave anyway. What the hell are you supposed to do?
I find Theresa May's negotiation strategy baffling, because, I mean, anyone who's ever done negotiation understands that it's a compromise on strength, effectively, and you're both trying to get the best deal for the pair of you. If you hand one side, essentially the whip hand in negotiations, then you are just at their pleasure. And by saying, I won't go for a no-deal Brexit, that's exactly what Theresa May has done. By taking the nuclear option off the table, she's got nothing to threaten them with, frankly. Nothing to make them worried about their own position. And, I mean, the reason I mentioned these sort of internal structural weaknesses of the EU earlier is because, from an outsider, and I'm just a layman, but as an outsider, I'm looking at the EU and thinking, right, okay, so they have major problems in Greece, they have major problems in Italy, they're probably going to have major problems in Spain, considering that Italy's sending all of their migrants to Spain now. They have major problems in Britain, because we're leaving. They have major problems across Central Europe, because they're forming a nationalist bloc across Central Europe. So on what firm ground do they stand to be able to dictate down to us, given how much money we give them, how much trade we have with them, and how much, surely there's going to be such internal problems if we just decided to just...
You see, it's the psychology of the bully.
Yes.
They can only do what they do so long as you're frightened of them and let them do it. And this is where we are with it. People are starting to stand up, but not strongly enough. And she is not standing up at all. And she's in a tremendously strong position. Because, we're a big world economy. We want to be the fifth or sixth world economy. They do an enormous amount of trade with us. We are in the forefront of many things in science and technology around the world. And we could say to them, this is the way it's going to work. And of course we want trade, friendship and cooperation with you, but now we've got to tell you how it's going to work. We know you don't really want us to leave, so it's silly to ask you how it can be done, so we're going to tell you how it's going to be done. And your interests won't be damaged, because we still want to trade with you. and you're still going to sell us in the short and medium term anyway. You're still going to sell us more than we're selling you.
Well, yeah, I mean, and this is the thing. This is what I was saying the other day. It's not that I personally am very much in the Janice Cause Mickey camp, where I think the European Union should be destroyed. But I appreciate that that doesn't have to be our negotiating position, and we should say, look, we understand that the European Union is frankly on rotting foundations, and we need to be delicate with you when we're leaving. You know, there's no reason we can't come to an accordance on things that we both want. But the fantasy of just essentially draining us for everything we've got. I mean, Theresa May, the way I like it is, Theresa May is being presented with a playground bully, and she's telling him that above all else, she's not going to punch him back. And it's like, yeah, but he's punching you, Theresa. You know, you are allowed to be strong and assertive, and you don't have to be unfair when you get your way. You just have to make sure the deal is done on your terms and not theirs.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, what more can I say? If you know, you don't have to be a genius to work out how this should be done. You either do it quickly your way, or it's never going to happen. And what we're looking at now, she doesn't want to do it. Now we're up to this ridiculous situation now where we've got a crisis going on this afternoon in Chequers, where she's got her cabinet trying to decide what can she do. And my view right from the start is that we're either not going to leave, or we will leave in a way that means we've left in name but not in reality.
Yes.
And what's on the cards, so reading today, we'll see what happens when the announcement's made, that there'll be some kind of Norwegian option, which is the worst possible option, because Norway pays them quite a lot of money, obeys quite a large proportion of their laws, and has open borders.
It has zero influence on policy making.
Well, very little. Not that even if you're in it, believe me, you don't have a lot of influence either. But you might as well have not bothered to leave. I would never support a Norway option or a Swiss option.
No, absolutely not. I mean, I'm obviously a hard Brexiteer. I'm one of those people who want just full exit. But yeah, and this is what Jacob Rees-Mogg was referring to when he said a vassal state, wasn't it?
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You know, the idea that we're essentially going to be at the pleasure of the European Union, at the pleasure of Brussels, but we'll have no influence over them, and yet we will still have to give them money.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what do you think is going to happen in the increasingly likely result that Theresa May doesn't give us a Brexit?
Well, she's only said one thing that I actually believe and trust her, and she said she doesn't want any more UK MEPs. She says we're going to be out of the council, out of the commission, and we won't have any more MEPs in the parliament. I believe that because above all, she wants to get rid of UKIP, because it was proportional representation voting system, which means we got more and more votes and then topped the poll in 2014. She wants to get rid of all that, so I'll trust her on that. So she has to have something. Well, okay, we're not in the commission, we're not in the council. They might send an ambassador or something, and they'll whitewash it in some way. But there won't be any more MEPs, so we can't mess things up for her again. And then it will be like we never left. And then my view is, if UKIP dies off and nobody else arises, in a few years' time we'll say, it was all a terrific mistake and we need to come back again.
Right, and so that leads me into Mr. Farage, who recently said on his radio show that if by 2019 Britain hasn't got the Brexit that he was expecting, he was going to return to frontline politics. How do you feel about that?
Well, he's in frontline politics. He never left.
In his opinion.
Nigel sits in the front row of the Parliament as leader of the EFDD group.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Because we all sit in the Parliament. They don't care what political party you're in.
Right.
They care about what group you're in.
Okay.
Now, Nigel formed the group right from the start when I was there, 2004. And the group now is called the EFDD, Europe of Freedom and Direct Democracy. He sits in the front of that. We all sit behind him. He's got about 40-odd members of that. There's a minimum of 7 countries you have to have. And that's why you see him on YouTube, because he's down in the front making those speeches. And he's in the front row because he's doing that in the front row. What he chose to do, and I don't blame him in the slightest for doing this, he decided he'd had enough of being UKIP leader. He left that job, and it's a tremendously stressful job, and he'd done it for many years. He decided he needed to take a break from that. He decided he wanted to make some money on LBC, etc. Great for him, never had a problem with that. But he can't now decide that he wants to come back as UKIP leader, because it doesn't work that way. I was elected unopposed for a year to sort the mess out. And everybody, including Nigel, thought UKIP was going to disappear down the plug hole. And I do believe he said, it'll be gone in 18 months anyway. And quite frankly, when I took over, it would have been gone in 4 weeks. If I hadn't raised the money to pay the creditors, it would have been declared insolvent and it would have been finished, it would have been gone. That hasn't happened. We are now on an even keel financially. I'm also bringing donations in, which we've been doing recently, enough for me to employ my own press officer, because I've worked with basically no resources, almost no resources for the last 4 months.
Yep.
Only volunteers what I could get, and a part-time press officer. Now we're raising enough money to pay for me to have a press officer. We'll soon have my own personal assistant every day, so we can start to be a lot more organised. People are coming back to the party, people are donating money to the party. The atmosphere has completely changed. From one of despair in February, it's now one of optimism and enthusiasm. And of course, what I've really found fantastic is that people like you, Paul Joseph Watson, Count Dankula, Milo, have actually been listening to what we've been saying. I hope I played a small part in that with the messages I've been putting out, and decided to come on and support us because we're standing for the kind of things that you agree with.
Yes.
And my feeling is that there is a tremendous market out there amongst ordinary, normal people who are sick to death of what's been done to them, who are sick to death of the political climate they're living in, with political correctness and all the rest of it, and actually want somebody who's actually talking straight and telling them the truth of what they believe. They don't necessarily have to agree with everything I say, but at least I'm saying things I think which a lot of ordinary people can relate to, and I want a party full of those kind of candidates when we come to an election. People are not playing a part, not just mouthing a party line, but actually believe in something which most people can relate to, and I think that there is a tremendous market out there. You know, I'm not doing this for the sake of my health or my bank balance. I'm doing this because, believe me, it's not benefiting either.
The idea that UKIP is a get-rich-quick scheme is quite amusing. But I mean, this is the thing with Article 13 and Article 11. We have a concrete example of UKIP actually making changes for the better, not only for Britain but for Europe as well. This is something that I think people forget, is that, I mean, UKIP to me has always seemed to be a party of, I guess I would call it British freedom, British liberty. That seems to have been the driving impetus behind UKIP's philosophy.
It is. I mean, time catches up with you and you get old. But you think, well, these are the same things I always believed in when I was a kid and thought this is the country I was growing up into. And then you find it's not. And you think, am I just a boring old fart? Am I old-fashioned and out? I've just been left behind. And then I find out, no, there's actually a lot of the young people, like yourself, and kids out there who think we're being sold a false message, and we actually want very similar things to what the older people like me. Of course the world moves on, it changes. This idea that we're going to go, UKIP wants to go back to the 1950s is nonsense. What we want is to take the best of the past and project it into the future. And society will always develop and change, but the point is it needs to be done on some fundamental principles. And we used to have some very good ones about presumed innocent until found guilty, free speech, where you could actually live your life, get on with it, live and let live. And these are all being eroded to a frightening degree now. I mean, one of the things I've spoke out about right from the beginning in 2004 when I became an MEP was the European arrest warrant. Now, this is a very difficult message to get across because people don't know what you're talking about. And until it affects somebody you know, I don't know, what's all that about? Only criminals get arrested. Okay, maybe they do, but sometimes innocent people get arrested. Any British citizen, I had a chap come out, you know these people who wave the starry sphincter flag outside Parliament?
Starry sphincter flag, Yes, I do,
He came up to me and said, oh, tell me, how will it benefit me not being in the European Union? And I said, well, for one thing, you can't be arrested on the basis of an accusation on a piece of paper unfounded by any evidence and then sent off to a jail somewhere in the European Union. And he looks at me, well, it's not going to happen to me. I thought, you don't know, mate, because I know people it's happened to, and they didn't think it was going to happen to them either.
Well, nobody ever thinks it's going to be them who's the recipient.
I mean, probably people will watch this and say, well, what's he getting worried about that? No, there's an increasing number of these cases. People go on holiday, they come back, and then suddenly find they're on a European arrest warrant, and they're being carted off to some corrupt country, like Romania or Bulgaria, and they haven't done anything. And they can prove they haven't done anything because they weren't even there when it happened. Go to the extradition court, and extradition court says, sorry, there's nothing we can do about it. There is something called, I can't think what the term is now, it's gone out of my head, but basically all the EU's legal systems, judicial systems, prison systems, police systems are judged to be of equal value. So if you're arrested...
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Mutual recognition, this was the term I was trying to think. So if a policeman in Bulgaria arrests you, takes you to, goes to the court, oh, he was guilty of such and such. Right, they'll write out what the accusation is. Don't have to provide any evidence. Send it to the authorities in this country. They will take you to the extradition court. Oh, well, you've been accused of fraud. I didn't do anything. It doesn't matter. I can prove I didn't do anything. It doesn't matter. You're going to be extradited off to the country that issued the extradition papers for you.
That's very interesting. So I have friends who live in Eastern Europe, and the universal complaint about their political systems that they get is they're deeply corrupt because they came out of the ex-Soviet systems, where corruption was the norm. So, I mean, to say that they're necessarily the equivalent of a high-trust society like Britain is kind of ridiculous.
It is, but you see, because it is regarded as a single country called Europe, if you were arrested for something, if you were accused of a crime in Manchester and you fled to London, well, okay, you'd be arrested, taken to a court, you'd be driven up to Manchester to the court there. The view of the people who organise this whole thing, this project, is that there's no difference between London and Bucharest, or London and Rome, or any other capital you can think of, any other town. You will be taken and you will be sent there because it's the same system, the same country. Now, I don't know, perhaps some of your viewers watching this might think that's a bit of an arcane example to actually give, but there is a whole raft of legal instruments and legal institutions that have been created in order to create a system of criminal law. And what I said was that this European arrest warrant will one day be used against political dissidents. Now, I'm going to say something now, I'm not going to name somebody because I don't think they want to be named, but one of the people who helped to organise the Tommy Robinson free speech debate was arrested in Holland.
Really?
He doesn't even know the basis on which he's been arrested. He's had a vague accusation. He's been detained now for over a month because and the papers, he's been extradited to a non-EU country, but one that has an arrangement with the EU under a bilateral agreement. He's been sitting in a prison now for over a month, not knowing exactly what he's accused of, and it doesn't even know what the extradition arrangements are, because the country can do it under about 3 different arrangements that it's got with the EU. So he can't even get that piece of paper to say exactly on what basis he's being held or what is supposed to be extradited. And the Dutch have actually issued it, because the paperwork wasn't delivered, he was held illegally for a week, and now the Dutch have taken out a 30-day detention order against him while this other country formulates their paperwork. Now, he's maintaining that he's totally innocent of whatever the accusation is, and doesn't actually quite know what it is. But the point is, in England, that couldn't happen to you because of something called habeas corpus. If they want to put you in prison, they've got to charge you with something. We all know this. We're all brought up on Dixon and Dock Green in my case, and Inspector Frost and all the rest of it. And you know very well that if the police arrest you, they must have already gathered the evidence. And they take you in, they interview, they've got to charge you in 24 hours, longer if it's a terrorist thing, but eventually after a day, for a couple of days, they've got to charge you with something. You go to a court, they can remand you in custody or they can put you on bail. Not like that on the continent. They have a completely different legal system. You can be locked up while they investigate the case.
This is something that Roger Scruton actually talks about quite a lot in his book, Where We Are. He goes through the reason that English common law is as it is, and he essentially boils it down to, look, on the continent they have the inquisitorial court system, and it's the state presiding over what's happening. But in Britain we have the adversarial system, and so the law becomes a tool for the common citizen to use in their own defence. And so you don't have, as you say, you can't just be locked up without evidence on the accusation. And these differences are so fundamental philosophically that people don't understand the ramifications of it. And I mean, honestly, I do think that it's this kind of philosophical difference that probably meant that Brexit was inevitable. I think people are going to go for it, and I think they don't even realise why they look at Europe and see tyranny. I don't think they understand it.
And most people are not taught this. Instead of teaching them about the bloody Nazis, why don't they teach them about how their own political system evolved? Because if you read English history from 1066 onwards, really what it's about is the development of parliamentary government, because that's the thread that and it has its roots back in the Anglo-Saxon period as well. And that's what develops all through that historic period until down to the current day. In fact, we've only lived in a proper democracy for the last 100 years, really.
But it's all been it's been and again, this is something people forget. It's like a climb out of a hole. You know, the march against tyranny. And I mean, you can see this with Magna Carta, the English Bill of Rights, the eventual evolving into what we understand to be a modern parliamentary democracy. And if you had to sum it up in one word, I think you could use the word accountability. You know, that's everything about the English justice system and political life. It's about holding those who are imbued with power to account.
Yeah.
And the European Union is the opposite of this. It just runs under the complete reverse.
There's a marvellous book written in 1471 by Sir John Fortescue, who was a constitutional lawyer who worked for the Lancastrians under Henry VI. Once Henry VI was bumped off, he then transferred and started working for Edward IV. And one of the problems there at the time was how to deal with the aristocracy, a problem that wasn't solved until Henry VII, Henry VIII. How do you deal with these group of people who have this power and influence? And he then analysed the difference between the continental systems, the French system and the English system. And some of the things in that book are still kind of relevant today.
I'll have to check that out.
Because it's a really fascinating, it's difficult to read because it's arcane language, but it's basically what it's saying is on the continent, the aristocrats were not taxed. They could do what they like. As you know, only the peasants were taxed in France. In Britain, it was different. The aristocrats still had to pay tax to the monarch. They were still subservient, although they had a lot of power. And what he said was this is the way of actually reducing their power to make sure that they couldn't become overpowerful. And it heralded this whole development under Henry VII, where they started employing new men who weren't dependent, they didn't have their own lands and their own power. They were dependent on the favour of the king. And this is how the modern system developed. And there's lots of other interesting parallels between the two continental system and the UK system.
Yeah, no,
it's quite even after 600 years nearly, it's still interesting to read.
It's about the principle of the thing, isn't it? And I'm strongly of the opinion that the fact that the English peasantry was armed is an important factor in that. Because I mean, the French peasants weren't allowed to bear arms, whereas the English peasants were forced every Sunday to do archery practice. And I think that's the same sort of ethos that ended up transferring over to America with firearm ownership. The whole point was to keep the government accountable. The peasants had to be able to resist. When you
did have a revolution in France, it was much more violent than anything because they'd been suppressed for so long. The French Revolution was horrific, and they had revolutions. They had uprisings in the medieval period, which were pretty horrific as well. But I like to think that there's something about the English were a bit bloody-minded. And even though it was a hierarchical system, it was an aristocratic system, there was still a point where you couldn't push people too far.
Oh yeah, I mean there was.
They would rebel.
In the 14th century, there was a law that decreed that an Englishman could close his door on an agent of the king, and the agent of the king couldn't force his way into his house. Yeah. I mean now that sounds completely normal, but at the time that's absolutely revolutionary. The idea that a peasant can resist an agent of the king, that's incredible. You know, and this is the whole thing. Like it's always been about the decentralization of power in England and the sort of the imbuing of the common man. I mean, I think common is the word that you would use to describe England, whereas to describe the continent, I would use the word elite. Yeah. You know, and I think it's very much shown in Charles I, who wanted to be an absolute monarch, and got his head cut off, and Louis XIV, who legitimately could say, "I am the state." And I think that really is the sort of it's the gulf between them. And I think that pervades the entire Anglosphere with English common law and just the English language.
I think it's something to do with the Anglo-Saxon inheritance as well.
Yeah.
I think that has something to do with it.
Yeah.
But that brings us back to where we are today, because we need to reassert that. And this is what I find so... you can only laugh, really, I'm afraid, Carl, when you're called right-wing and hard right.
Yeah, I do,
It is nonsense, absolute nonsense. I mean, UKIP is actually people who are quite liberal with a small L. Mm-hmm. We've got all kinds of people in UKIP from all kinds of backgrounds. We come to our conference and mingle. I mean, what the mainstream media do is they come to the conference, they find a person with one tooth and a silly hat, interview them and get them to say something outrageous, and then that's the whole conference. Well, it isn't like that. You've got a whole broad spectrum of people from all kinds of different backgrounds. In fact, it's quite surprising, the interesting people you met. I was when I first became leader, I went to a talk in Gloucester where we were packed out. We had 100 people or something, more than that, 150. And the chap there said to me, he's a staunch UKIPper, he said, I've worked in 38 different European countries. He said, I was a sales manager, so his job was travelling around all these countries. And he said, that's why I want to get out of the European Union, because I've seen them firsthand.
Yeah, I've been there. But, okay, well, Gerard, thank you very much.
You're welcome. Hope that was useful.
I think it will be. Thank you.